Hello, old friends, new friends, old folkies. My name is John Smale. Uh, I'm an architectural designer living in Belleville, Ontario, but in a former lifetime, I operated a club, a folk coffee house venue, and cultural hub in London, Ontario. That was then, this is now. This is the new SmalesPace. It's all about talking about then, talking about now, talking about subjects related to music, interviews, playing some music, and even some unrelated topics, just for the heck of it. And so here we go. Today's episode is about the early musicians at SmalesPace, reminding you again, winding back to the year 1970. It was a fertile time. I knew lots of local musicians because I kind of played in that local scene, but I went out to see a lot of musicians in venues they were playing at. When you think of those early days, always a standout for me is Paul Mills, because he was one of the first musicians I ever heard in London, Ontario, at the Hub Coffee House at University of Western Ontario, where I was attending in those days. Also at the Hub Coffee House, there was the Taylors, Vicky and Tom Taylor, brother and sister. Through Vicky, I got to meet Joni Mitchell when she came to visit Vicky, and Vicky brought her down to SmalesPace. That was one of those memories in life that are indelible in my mind, and I'm very proud to say that I met one of the best singer-songwriters of all time. There was Paul Shakespeare, who was a partner of Paul Mills in groups that they played with, and Michael Hasek was performing all around London in those days. And then there was the group Doug MacArthur, Gord Lowe, and Frank Wheeler. I think they all lived at Doug's farmhouse estate in Coldstream, Ontario, just west of London. And they were quite a magical trio, all different musical styles. And they were real regulars and added a real positive songwriter vibe to SmalesPace. And certainly Doug MacArthur became larger than life really when he associated himself with booking at Change of Pace after I sold SmalesPace, and the name changed and the location changed to Change of Pace. Very creative. Rick Taylor, still going strong in the London music scene. Fantastic. He was just the boy wonder at the time, whiz bang guitar player, etc. Jeanette Gritani, who I went to university with and is a lifelong friend. I've probably known Jeanette for well over 50 years. And Jeanette lives in Mexico now and visits regularly to Canada when she can to see her daughter and old friends. And Jeanette used to hit the stage, and we played music together back in the 60s, I guess it would be called. Rob Smith, local musician in London, who I played with many times, and I always thought Rob was just a terrific, sensitive interpreter of songs. A lot of people didn't write their own material yet. That's something that brewed and grew with time, and it was an organic process where other musicians started hearing, hey, I can write a song too, and that's what came of it. Jim and Melissa, wow, if you don't know Jim and Melissa, they were a husband and wife team, usually played down at the York Hotel. They were quite a visual. I have a painting of them here somewhere, which I will bring up sometime. It's a very large painting. Jim played banjo and kazoo. No, his wife played banjo and kazoo, and Jim played various horn instruments, and they were like jazz inflected and experimental music, needless to say. And in that vein, Roy MacDonald, he was London's own Allen Ginsberg, and they even looked alike. And Roy was not a musician, he was a poet, and he used to sort of take cultural notes all the time in his black book and arcane and messages he was writing down. As it turns out, he was quite a character, and he was everywhere we went. He seemed to be there, whether it was the York Hotel or some downtown activity, or he'd be out at a farm, and there would be Roy. So, real character. More on him later. Mo Ewart, wildly funny, deeply disturbing musician who's sadly passed on. Mo is most known for his classic song that he wrote and that Dave Bradstreet recorded, and he and Paul Mills are on tour, and they do that song, Mud Puddle Sailor. Terrific song. Perth County Conspiracy, what can you say? They were magicians on stage that played instruments and sang. They wove magic. My brothers and I were nuts about them. And there was a mixture of music, poetry, storytelling, and some of the songs went on for 10 minutes, and they were just magical mystery tour. Terrific group. They were out of Stratford, Ontario, and they had their own coffee house up there called the Black Swan, and it was a terrific place to visit. And Stratford in those days was a great place to hang out. Rolf Kempf, a Toronto musician who has since moved to Vancouver. Rolf was on the scene in those early days, and Rolf was a songwriter. He really was just a strong writer, a strong songwriter. Pardon me, that's hard for me to say today. Spriggs and Bringle, wow. Colleen Peterson and Mark Haynes teamed up, and they were a duo. The harmonies were great. Mark's sense of humor was unparalleled. One day, they were staying at my loft on Dundas Street, and Colleen came down with the worst case of the flu or whatever it was, but she just said, "John, I cannot perform tonight." And Mark says, "Oh, John, then you're going to have to find a replacement because I've never played solo." I said, "Well, you know what, Marky? Tonight's your night. Tonight you go solo because you are terrific on your own, and all you need is a boost, and I hope I'm the right guy to give you the shock treatment." Mark went on stage and has never looked back. Mark is a household name on the bar circuit throughout Ontario, throughout Canada. Mark puts on shows that are comedy specials, but he's also a very sensitive singer and songwriter, and sings a lot of traditional songs, and he's written many songs. Love him. La Troupe Grotesque, a non-music act. Very early on, we met them in Toronto, Jeanette and I, and Michael and Paul. Michael was the little guy, Paul was the tall, laconic guy. And they did a brand of humor that was way ahead of its time, and it really was received enthusiastically because there wasn't a lot of that sort of let's get together and do comedy and have fun with it. So they were groundbreaking, and I love to have said that I helped them along their career. Original Sloth Band. Now, this developed into Canadian history. Tom Evans, Ken and Chris Whiteley, the Whiteley brothers. They did traditional old jazz, music that we would call roots music, I suppose, but coming from an era of the 20s and 30s when it wasn't all guitar. There were horns and what can I say? Their brand of music was unique and has spawned many lookalike groups. And as I say, Chris and Tom, Tom was a professional dentist at the time, so he was on the road with these guys, and Chris and Kenny have become and spawned legends of their own, their progeny. Terrific. Luke Gibson. What can I say about Luke? He's the original Luke and the Apostles from the Yorkville days. Always loved Luke, and when he came to stay with us, he really grounded us. He was living in Killaloe at the time, and brought a lot of great peaceful songs, very much unlike what he was doing on stage with Luke and the Apostles. And he went on to become managed and produced by Bernie Finkelstein and True North Records, and that there'll be a whole chapter on True North Records, because that was Bruce Coburn, Murray McLaughlin, Ronnie Abramson, Dan Hill, and so from those were the early days, and we learned and we grew from each other, and those musicians then talked to other musicians to talk about their experiences, the good experience they had at SmalesPace, and how maybe they should check it out, give John Smale a call, and see if they can get a date, an opening act, or a week of their own. So that was those were the early days of musicians, and it was great fun, learning experience for all, and turning musicians that were doing covers and turning them into musicians that became songwriters. That's my episode for today. Please, if you're enjoying these talks and the way it's developing, please subscribe. It really helps, and you'll get notifications, and we can continue along this journey of telling stories and having some fun with each other. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.